continue to grow us in a healthier and healthier way. So what I'm going to talk about tonight, we've got some kind of business-ish stuff with the church that we're going to get to, but I want to give a little bit of background to kind of where these decisions come from. And we, as a church staff, for the last few months, have been looking at the idea of how do we as a church take an honest look at our health and continue to say, how do we become healthier and healthier as individuals and as a church? So there's a book that I read this summer by Scott McKnight, who is one of our canon theologians, which just means like super smart guy that writes books that is involved in our diocese and serves in that way. He wrote a book called A Church Called Tov, and Tov is the Hebrew word for good in the Old Testament, and he kind of wrote a long book talking about what does it look like for us as small C churches to value us becoming healthier and healthier and not simply growing bigger, having a bigger footprint or having a larger brand or a larger platform or kind of fill in whatever buzzword you want there. And for us, this has been a journey to kind of say, what does it look like for us to, continue to go do a better job of caring for the vulnerable, continue to do a better job of valuing rest, continue to do a better job of valuing people for who they are and not just kind of what they contribute to our community. And one of the things that's come up as we've kind of talked about this over the last 3 months and really over the last year with this subject is the idea of us being more clear and having more clarity to kind of the different roles that people have at Redeemer. So we recognize that a lot of this is kind of my own stuff in that I love kind of messy, like organic, kind of grow it up from the grassroots sort of organizations. And I'm realizing that now as we've grown from, 20 people in, the shoemaker's house 8 years ago to, 100 plus here on a Sunday, the same systems, they need to change a little bit, and the clarity needs to grow because it's a way for us to serve you better, for us to be more clear about the roles that we have. And so we spent a long time, and some of the fruit of this was when maybe a month ago, when we talked about Benjamin transitioning his role from pastor of discipleship, and I noticed you took a second, but you nailed it this morning. Associate pastor in residence to highlight the role he plays here, but also the gospel work he does in this building the other Monday through Friday of the week with his work with Peace Prep. Us bringing Pat and inviting Pat into to kind of oversee discipleship, kind of giving some more clarity with that. And our goal is to continue to give more and more clarity, not only for our sake, for understanding what we do and what we don't do, but also for your sake, kind of understanding who does what around here and kind of who to look for guidance and direction in certain areas. And so one of the things that we have shifted with this, and Leon, you can come up here to explain some of this. One of the things that we shifted with this is that Leon and I have given clarity to our roles. And so for a long time, we have just been Pastor Leon and Pastor Drew, and we will always be known as that. Like, please don't call us anything. You can call us just Drew or Leon if you want to, but don't call Leon Pastor of Teaching and Discipleship Leon. That might be a mouthful. But we recognized that over the years, when we hired Leon probably 5+ years ago now, almost 6 years ago, our relationship, we were hiring him for us to work together, and we were going to kind of figure out what that looked like. And so we kind of said, we're going to kind of have this boat leave the dock, and we're going to kind of build it a little bit as we go. And so as we've done that, we've learned the things that I'm good at and the things that he's good at. We've had some things that he was responsible for that came back to me, some things that I was responsible for that went back to him. But we feel like in the last year, we've gotten a lot more clarity on what we are good at and the ways that we can best serve you, as well as the things that kind of give us most life as individuals. And so we've landed on these two titles. I'm going to let Leon kind of explain a little bit about that, and then I'll kind of wrap us up with this.
Yeah, so if you see the term rector, if that is intimidating at all or is weird, we understand. It's just us leaning a little bit more into our Anglican heritage. We're an Anglican church, the Anglican Church in North America, and typically someone who fills Drew's role in the church, in Anglican church, they would be the rector. Okay, some more terms that you may be familiar with, but Drew definitely is not comfortable with, are terms like senior pastor or lead pastor, those kinds of things. Essentially, in the Anglican church, you're supposed to smile or laugh or something there. Essentially, in the Anglican Church, that would be the rector. And so Drew will lean into that role as the rector because he does lead us in that way. And then so I will fall into the role of being the pastor for preaching and teaching, or pastor of preaching and teaching. And that just kind of solidifies the things that not only am I passionate about, but that I really love doing and really want to do long term with my life. So being the pastor for teaching and preaching here just kind of lends more to my gifts and strengths and what I give to the church. And Drew being the rector is without a doubt exactly who he is and the gifts and strengths that he lends to our body. This does not mean we're still a small operation. So this does not mean by any stretch that I will only preach and teach, as you've seen tonight. And this does not mean that by any stretch that he will only do anything. We still share a lot of responsibilities. But just as he said, as an opportunity to just kind of clarify as we go down this road of building a more healthy and sustainable church structure and organization, it's better just trying to clarify these roles and these giftings and strengths where we're going to lean in as we continue to go forward. This also goes into Pastor Benjamin's role. Did we talk about his role more? We did already?
A month or two ago,
okay.
But you can explain it again.
Yeah. So for Pastor Benjamin, what we understood as an ordained member of the Anglican Church in North America, his primary role is serving here at Peace Preparatory Academy, which is a ministry role. And so what he does with us at Redeemer Community Church is essentially, as a member of our church and a member of our diocese, he just serves and fills in any way that he can to support us as a church and us as pastors. And so he's a valuable member of the team, and we just thought that fit more as a pastor in residence, kind of I don't know what you say, I don't know, jack of all trades is not it, but just a guy who lends his gifts to fill in however he can as an ordained member of the church, a valued ordained member of our church. And so, I didn't rehearse these things, so it feels a little unclear. You said you could tell, Maureen? We're going to excommunicate Maureen.
That's
here
at the
soon.
bottom.
Okay.
That's number 9.
That's
Excommunicate Maureen.
Yeah. Number 9. Proceedings of excommunication. That's what we're going to do next, okay?
But like we said, this is hopefully will give more clarity to what we do over time. And really what we're doing is not changing what we do, is naming this is the roles that we play. So from the Anglican perspective, kind of how the diocese views us is this has been my role as rector since we planted the church. We've just never been comfortable with that terminology. But as you'll see kind of through the theme throughout the night, we're trusting that the Lord has planted us as an Anglican church and calling us to kind of lean more into what it means to be Anglican. And so that has been very helpful. And like Leon said, yes, he will be a pastor teaching and preaching, but he will also wear a number of hats. But it is, practically speaking, he will continue to not only take 50%, but probably take a little bit more than 50% of the preaching responsibilities as an opportunity for him to lean more into his giftings and then to free me up to lean more into my giftings as far as organizational leadership of the church. So hopefully this is helpful. Does anybody have any questions at this point? All right, this is the only time you ever get to ask questions in church. So take advantage if you have questions.
Yeah.
Perfect lead in. Next, Christy, can you hit that next slide?
Or anybody.
Or Riley, either one of you guys.
With a finger. Go ahead and hit that thing.
So this is a slide that kind of goes through all the titles, just so you know. Nothing else changes. And other than Benjamin's, which changed a month or two ago, everybody else's title stays the same. So you should have hopefully that gives you a little more clarity.
Yep. Nothing changes.
Any other questions?
Oh, next announcement.
We'll hold that for a second.
Man, strike 2.
No, you guys.
Strike 2.
That's actually a wonderful lead-in, though. Just like Ben's question.
No, I don't like it.
Like
She's overstepping. She's overstepping.
We planted these questions out in the crowd. We will get to that in just a second, so hold that question. Anybody else? Beautiful. Okay. All right, Maureen, tell me your question again.
No.
Elders, ... question mark. Okay, so in the same vein of us kind of leaning more into who we are as an Anglican church, when we planted the church 7 years ago, we planted from Trinity Anglican. So get a little bit of background here. Trinity, before it was Anglican, was a vineyard church, and they operated with an elder-led model. And so there were elders at the church, and they had the primary kind of shepherding and leadership responsibilities. And so when we planted Redeemer, we kind of took that and just kind of copy and pasted it to our structure of leadership rather than kind of starting fresh and starting new, because that's what we knew was accepted, and we kind of had a grid for how that would work. However, that is not how a traditional Anglican church works. And so the diocese that we are a part of, Churches for the Sake of Others, so our Bishop, Todd Hunter, is an incredibly helpful and fruitful place for us to be. We are cared for well. There's an enormous amount of flexibility that they give us to be missional, with guardrails theologically that we stay within what is biblical and orthodox, but a ton of leeway missionally. And so they've never pushed us very hard to kind of transition from the elder-led model to a traditional Anglican leadership model. Mm-hmm. However, in the last few years, they've kind of nudged us that direction, and we recognize that we are really, out of like the 70-plus churches in our diocese, we're the only one at this point that's not kind of a traditionally Anglican leadership structure. So Trinity, our mother church, transitioned about 2 years ago, and we've just kind of been dragging our feet a little bit. But we, in this past year, Leah and I have spent a ton of time kind of thinking through this and talking about what it would look like for us to make that transition. And we've talked to the elders over the summer. And so and they voted unanimously, which was saying a lot. They voted unanimously to kind of give up their power to transition this to a vestry-led church. So what that will look like is a vestry is simply the original word for it is where the senior pastor or rector would meet with the group of leaders in the vestry room, which is where they put the vestments on, which we have one vestment, which is our stole we wear. Hey, Sama, come on up, you're good. It comes from that background where that's the room they would meet in, and they would then get the term vestry. And so what it is a group of lay people, and their role is to oversee the temporal, and we can hit the next slide for me, kind of the temporal leadership of the church. So these are lay people nominated from within the membership. Primary responsibility is to support in the execution of the church's stated mission and ministry. Vestry members are actually legal representatives of the church, and they have principal authority. The vestry has principal authority over temporal life of the church. And so the role that the elders played, in a lot of ways, that will go towards the vestry. So we are not in a rush to kind of make this transition, just because we want to make sure we do this really well and do it right, because this will mean that we legally change the bylaws of the church. So we will hire a lawyer and kind of go through the whole process of making sure this is legally kind of all of our I's are dotted and T's crossed. But what we wanted to do when we talked about this, we wanted to go ahead and start just kind of letting you all know about this process so that it doesn't feel sprung on you. Our goal is to kind of have everything in place by the beginning of 2022, so we would kind of kick this off in January of 2022. And kind of how this will work is, we don't know. So first of all, let me give a qualifier. What we're not going to give you is these are the exact details of exactly how this is going to work, because we don't know all the details. We have questions about what decisions will come from the staff, what decisions will come from the vestry, how do we make sure that the vestry is, one of the questions we had from the staff was how do we make sure the vestry is a great representation of the diversity at Redeemer, so it's not all one kind of section of the church or another. What does kind of term limits look like? But the kind of normal vestry model that we've seen in a lot of Anglican churches that we respect a lot is that they are vestry members commit for 3-year terms on the vestry. So it's kind of to throw out a round number, what this would look like would be like if 6 people became vestry members, and to start there'd be 2 of them would serve 1 year, 2 of them would serve 2 years, 2 of them would serve 3 years, and after that first year, 2 more people would be added to the vestry to replace the ones that rolled off after the first year. And so everyone in the church who is a member in good standing, so this is pretty much everyone but Maureen, will be have an option. They would be nominated to be a part of the vestry, and if they would have to accept that nomination, they kind of fill out not like an application for a job, but just kind of a background, letting us know kind of where you are with your walk with the Lord, if there's anything that you have hesitations about with the church, and those are the things those are the questions that we're trying to figure out over the next 8 or 10 weeks. And then they would be kind of put their name in the hat. And if we had more than two, then we would put the names in the hat and draw two of them, add those two to the vestry. If we had 6 people on the vestry, those 2 members would serve for 3 years, then rotate off. And so in the vestry, one role that will be crucial is the role of treasurer. So right now we have a finance team made up of Alyssa Wells, Betty Tazera, and Matt Bowers, and myself kind of make up that team. And I'm so... Yeah, I could not tell you how grateful I am for those 3 people and the ways that they serve in ways that you guys will never see, all the behind the scenes, but the ways that they look through every statement after every month and go through with a fine-tooth comb, make sure that we are being good stewards of our money and kind of all of our I's are dotted and T's are crossed legally. But one of them we will kind of have to have on the vestry to start because we don't want to start all over with a treasurer that doesn't know anything about kind of the finances of the church. And so the other role in this, outside of the members of the vestry, is the role of senior warden. So you guys are getting all the Anglican words tonight: rector, vestry, senior warden. But this is a role that as rector, I choose this person that they serve in perpetuity, kind of until they don't want to anymore, and they kind of oversee the vestry. So this person and myself work together in a lot of ways, and this he or she would oversee the vestry, but we would work in tandem in a lot of ways just to kind of help run the ins and outs of the church. So with the members of the vestry, this is any male or female can be nominated from our church in good standing, who's in good standing. So that's kind of a general overview. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
Okay. What questions do you have about this? And qualifier, I may not know the answer, but we want the questions because this is part of the process. So Ronnie, what you got? Yeah, so I mean, it's a good question of like, all right, if people are coming into it, there is the potential of messiness that could come when we're adding new people, which we look back on the last 7 years and we are very grateful. Though it was not the traditional Anglican model, we are very grateful for the stability of the elders. And so the elders that have been the elders since, that are currently the elders, myself and Leon, plus Barry DeBrew, who led worship, and then Josh Shoemaker. And us two, well, let's talk about the other two. Those 2 men have provided an enormous amount of stability to this role of leadership. They are men that have a high degree of integrity and ethics and have just provided a ton of stableness to our church. The con of the model that we've been in, one of the reasons we're excited to kind of move into a traditional Anglican model is to kind of get more voices from our church to be able to have a role in who we become as a church. And so, yes, there is the potential of kind of politicking in that, but there's enough kind of safeguards in place to kind of keep that from happening, hopefully. And one of the things that some churches have done that we're not certain we're going to do or not, one of the things that some churches have done is that when there's new members becoming part of the vestry, if there's 5 people nominated for those 2 spots, if we have 2 spots, again, don't quote me on all this, don't hold me to all this, but if there's somebody that the current vestry says that person's they don't have the integrity to play this role, then they would get removed from an opportunity to have their name put in the hat. So hopefully that helps us kind of keep the high degree of integrity that's needed for a role like this. Brendan, do you have a question?
Yes. I was just wondering what qualifies as temporal life when you say they have the principal authority over temporal life of the church. That's just not a term.
Yeah. So good. Thank you for clarifying. So what that looks like is that's a general term for kind of the well-being of the church. And so what that looks like and when that's a vestry decision versus a staff decision, those are the questions that we need to figure out. Traditionally, a vestry, like if we, before we moved to this space, when we were looking at spaces for years before the Lord provided this space, that would have been a traditional vestry conversation to kind of figure out like where we're going to go as a church, looking through the lease, potential leases, potential places for us to purchase, all that. The finances, the budget, that would go under the vestry, and that's never been a part of the staff. The elders have overseen that through a lot of guidance from the finance team, but that would now go into the vestry would make those decisions. If we hired a new staff, if we said we would, the church has grown, there's 800 children, Anna may need an assistant at that point, like we should hire somebody, then we would go to the vestry and say, is there money in this, do you feel, is this wise for us to hire somebody? What do we have for this? So this is kind of the temporal decisions, if that makes sense. It's a good question because we don't know, and that's kind of one of the things that we'll figure out in the next 2 months is like kind of a list of like, if this, then it goes to vestry. If that, it goes to the staff. And kind of one way to look at it is kind of the working on the church is a vestry, and working in the church is a staff decision. Like if, what songs are being played on a Sunday, that is a Rachel, wherever Rachel went, Rachel decision that the staff works together on. If it's for the kids ministry, like going from 3 rooms to 4 rooms, that's not a vestry decision. That's a staff decision. But yeah, Christina. Yes. Yep. So it is it's male and female. Yep. Any other questions? Go ahead, Daewon. That's a good question. That I feel like that's a good thing for us to write down to kind of hash out a little bit. Off the top of my head, I would think that again, go back to kind of is it a kind of an in the church versus an on the church? If it's like if you have a question about you're frustrated that the parking is getting too tight, and you're like, we got to figure out a solution for parking. That would be more of a staff decision of like, we'll work on that to figure out a better plan for parking. If it's a big theological question that you are frustrated about the church, about some theological issue, we'll talk about that probably with both the staff and the vestry, but the vestry would have a lot of influence on it.
At that point, vestry, they're not out front leaders, so you probably wouldn't go to them directly with anything. You'd come to us, those you see, the staff, and we would decide where the discussion happens. If that makes sense.
Yeah. It's a good question, though.
Right.
Is there a size of the vestry that you think is healthy?
Yeah. So we have somewhere between like 6 and 12. And it's tricky. That's what's been suggested to us. Yeah. So this is not representative of. So right now.